It's so exciting when we step out in faith for the first time. When God calls us to something and we take that initial step of faith, we step out of the boat and we walk on the water, as it were, and keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. And I'm really, really pleased today to be interviewing Pastor Ben. As we said before, Pastor Ben, together with Emma and their three boys, are our youth pastors here at Soyes Church. But God has called them and they're stepping out by faith now to plant a church on the Isle of Wight. And so we wanted to give opportunity to interview, have a conversation with Ben today to find out a little bit more about that church plant and how we can get behind that and support that. So this is really exciting when a couple step out of the boat to church plant in a different location. So Ben, please, first of all, can you you've always had a passion for church planting, I know that. But tell us now, how have you come to this point where you feel God is calling you to plant on the Isle of Wight?
Yeah, definitely. It's been an amazing journey, really, of following God, I suppose. Really, that's where it all starts, doesn't it? We're all here serving church because we love church. Yeah. So me and Pete often meet and have coffees and talk about the future, talk about where we think God's leading us. And just before lockdown, we had that same conversation, had a lovely breakfast together, and just chatted about the future and really left it really with just lots of questions as go, we don't really know what any of us have got in store for the future. And then we went into lockdown, and during that, me and Emma went on holiday to the Isle of Wight, which we do every single year. And we just had the worst journey we've ever had in our life.
I remember that.
Just texting back saying, I can't believe we've broken down. We've broken down again. So a 2.5 hour journey took us 9.5 hours. Our car broke down 5 times. The first time it broke down, we're only 5 minutes away from home. And we could have turned around at that point and gone home. Yeah. But we said, no, we're going to keep going. So 5 breakdowns later, the car tyre blew out and we swerved across the motorway and pulled into the lay-by. And the whole time during all those moments where we could have just got towed home, me and Emma had this deep sense of, and it was the same, we both said the same thing to each other, which is, we just need to get there. Which was really unusual because having 3 kids in the back of the car, being children, they were just really well behaved for once and just being peaceful and quiet. And we just couldn't match the two things together. We were so stressed, but our kids were so peaceful.
Didn't the ferry break down on the way to the Isle of Wight as well?
So then we finally made it to the ferry port. We're sitting on the ferry, just like we've made it. And then we get literally 10 minutes across the Solent, and the announcement goes off saying, just to let you know that the ferry today is broken down and we can't restart the engines. And me and Emma just started hysterically laughing. Just at that point, you're just like, what else could go wrong? So we sat there for half an hour, floating adrift in the middle of the sea. But yet when we got there, we turned up to where we were staying, where we've stayed in the same place for years now. And we just had this joint murmur inside of us of, we've just got to get here. And for the first time driving from the ferry to where we're staying, which is about a half an hour drive, we just started to see the church that's there, and we just started to see people really, because I suppose like me, as we go on holiday, and it's we don't really think about life. We go there to escape life. We go there to have a nice break with our family and refresh ourselves. And so me and Emma, the same next morning, sat up together, started chatting and saying, I think God wants us to plant a church here.
Wow.
And normally when one of us says that, the other one says, I don't think you're right.
Right. Yeah.
And this was the first time we both said it, and we both like, I really feel that. Yeah, but also we both had the same thing, which was, why yesterday did we both have this drive just to get here? Yeah. And so for us, that's where the journey really of being like, I think God is calling us into this. Yeah. And for us to be like, actually all the murmurings over the last year of feeling like God's moving into something, we didn't really have an answer. When we met, there was no answer. We were like, do we start applying for jobs? Do we stay here? Do we do something new? And that murmur started there. And what's amazing is when then God gives you the call, you're like, oh wow, this movement that's been here all this time leads to this calling really. So that's kind of the call of how we've ended up deciding to go to the Isle of Wight. So that's the start of it.
That's fun. And God's timing is absolutely perfect, isn't it? And,
amazing.
And, when we need to know, God reveals it to us. Yeah. And that's brilliant. So obviously you came back from the Isle of Wight sort of, well, we met quite quickly, didn't we? And you were really passionate about and were saying, we really feel the call of God to this, which was brilliant. But how has God confirmed that over sort of since then? Because I know God's done some amazing things in confirming that this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, I suppose it's funny, isn't it? Being leaders, we talk about this so much. We teach it on a Sunday morning. We stand there and we go through the difference between calling and confirmation, how God brings those two things together. So me and Emma straight away when we felt this was like, but we need God's word for this. And so many leaders have spoken into us, and we've heard so many leaders speak here, and Pete's taught us it as well, that when you get the call, we need to find the confirmation, because actually
Absolutely,
the call and the confirmation means you've got the going, but you've got a firm foundation that's not going to be moved.
Yeah.
So then Emma straight away was like, Ben, I really need to hear from God from this. So that morning, as we spoke about it, she said, I'm going to go down to the beach. You can have the boys. So I had the 3 boys, just us. I was trying to pray with the 3 boys. And Emma went down to the beach, and she got down to the beach, maybe a 10-minute walk, and sat there, and her phone pinged, and it was the day devotional from Sawyers Church that day. So Emma opened it up, and we've been talking in the morning saying, how do we know God's calling us to go and plant a church online and to leave everything behind? Like, how do we know that? And in the devotional, it was Thomas wrote it, and he wrote these words. He said, Paul and Titus never knew at the beginning of their missionary journey that God was calling them to cross an ocean and to plant a church on an island. And Emma was just overjoyed that that exact moment, the hour that she went was the exact moment that the email pinged through, which is a random time of day, as we all know. There's no time when it consistently comes through, but also the right message. If we'd read it a day later or a day earlier, but in that moment, God saying, here it is, but also for encouragement for Thomas, that the faithfulness, the trust that when we write something in advance, that it is going to speak into someone's moment. So we had that, and Emma just came back saying, I've heard from God that this is the right time. So I said to Emma, I really want to get in contact with a guy called John Butler, who has planted a church in Aberystwyth. So I thought, oh, that's in Wales. So I thought he was the last person I know to plant a church. I don't know any of his backstory, but I thought it'd be really good to hear from another church planter. And so I got in contact with him that week and said, it'd be really great to have a chat. And his first question was, where are you going to plant a church? He said, that's really, have you got the location? And I said, oh, actually, we want to plant a church on the Isle of Wight. And to my amazement, his first response was, I can't believe this. I was a policeman on the Isle of Wight for 4 years. I was a detective.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? He goes, my home church is actually in Portsmouth.
Yeah.
And I've got a really great network on the island.
Fantastic.
And he goes, what are the chances that the next person from Assemblies of God to go plant a church is going to a place where I was a police detective for 4 years? As I've left and gone to Aberystwyth, the other end of England, God's saying, here it is. And I just couldn't believe that God did that for us. And that confirmation to stand on, God's got this. And it just carried on in moments by moments where we're pursuing this thing and just keep surrendering it to God, saying, God, we know this is of you. Would you give us that next bit of confirmation? And you said to me really early on, you said, as you start to follow this calling, Ben, God's confirmation will just keep coming and keep affirming it each step of the way. So we then said, after meeting with Pete, we started pursuing how do we become a charity and all that sort of stuff. So we contacted Assemblies of God to talk about that. Didn't tell him we were planting a church on the Isle of Wight, didn't tell him that stuff. We just said, how do we become a charity with Assemblies of God? And actually I was ill and I was off work in my bed and my phone rang and I really felt I should answer it, and I don't normally when I'm sick. And I answered it and a voice started talking, whose voice I knew from Assemblies of God, and it was actually Stuart Keir.
No, Stuart.
And he said to me, I've heard you're looking at setting up a charity, and that always comes flagged up to me because he's the general manager for Assemblies of God. And he said, it always gets flagged to me. Can you tell me a bit of your story? And so I said to him, me and my wife really feel called to go plant a church on the Isle of Wight. And he said, pardon? I said, me and my wife really feel we've been called to plant a church on the Isle of Wight. He went, this is amazing. He said, this week, me and Glenn Barrett have met together. He's the national leader for Assemblies of God, and we prayed about the UK. We're saying, God, where do you need Assemblies of God churches to be planted here in the UK? And he said, we came up with 2 locations. Do you want to guess where one of those locations is, Ben? I said, by any chance, is it the Isle of Wight? And he said, yeah. He said, that was Monday. I'm ringing you today on Wednesday. He said, it wasn't in your email. It wasn't in anything. But right then he was like, he said, what was nice is that as leaders, we so often believe God for the unbelievable. And we try and strategize how we're going to get there. And he goes, the next day I'm ringing you and you're saying you want to go and plant where we want a church to be planted. And he said, it's just amazing. So that confirmation there was so key for us to be like, even when you're sick and you can't do anything, God in the background is still moving the cogs and still working things together for his purposes, really. So, that's another story that goes along the way with that. And I suppose the other amazing one is that Assemblies of God have got a guy who heads up charity commissioning and all that sort of stuff for Assemblies of God. So he rang me and talked me through the process of becoming a charity in one of those long, boring meetings where you're like, okay, these are the 101 things we've now got to do. And he hung up the phone after I shared the story about going to Isle of Wight, and he rang me back within 10 minutes. And I was like, oh, he must have forgot something. And he said, Ben, you're never going to believe what's just happened. He goes, as you hung up the phone, an email pinged up, and the title of it was Isle of Wight. He goes, I assumed it was you emailing me to confirm some details. He said, you never guess who it is. He goes, there's a Assemblies of God minister living on the island who doesn't have an Assemblies of God church, which means his status of being a minister is in question at the moment. and we haven't heard of him for 4 years, and suddenly, as you've hung up the phone, his email has pinged up on my computer saying Isle of Wight, and actually that's a first connection for you guys to try and maybe reach out to someone who's on the island, he's an Assemblies of God minister, and he's trying to figure out where he sits in this with Assemblies of God. Just as you've hung up, he's emailed me. And for us, those moments are so spectacular, I suppose, because the minutes matter, don't they?
Yeah.
If that had happened a day before, a day later, a week later, but 5 minutes just for it to appear on his computer was just absolutely amazing. And then we got the honour to actually meet these two Assemblies of God ministers on the island who have been there for 23 years and pioneered a church there that's now shut down. And we got to hear from them their story. And what was amazing was to see these two people who wanted to pray for us and champion us, who believed in us and were like, this is amazing. We've been praying that a young couple would come to the island and bring an Assemblies of God church and plant an Assemblies of God here. And what are the chances of us even connecting? What are the chances of us this week? And when we were on the island, we actually texted them and said, are you around? Like, really spare of the moment thing. And they were like, we're free this afternoon. And we turned up, had a cup of tea. They prayed over us. We're so excited to think the embers that they lit all those years ago are burning in other people who aren't even there yet. So they're some of the confirmations for us, and there's been tons along the way. I think the best way we described it in the last meeting I had with someone was saying, planting a church is like walking in the middle of a whirlwind. It's fine as long as you're in the eye and you're following God's footsteps, but as soon as you veer off and you get pulled into the chaos of moving house and all that sort of stuff, you definitely feel it. But that's been us for some of our amazing confirmations, really, that we'd love to share with you guys. And
excellent. And you know, God's got plans for all of us. You know, just as God's got plans for Ben and Emma, God's got plans for you listening here today. And as you push doors, you know, God will confirm his calling upon your life through scripture, as he did for Ben and Emma, but through circumstances as well. So I just want to encourage you, if you're listening this morning, you know, seek God for the plans he has for you, and see the amazing way in which he opens doors and confirms it through scripture. Now, Ben, you've talked a lot about Emma, and you've talked a lot about the boys as well. Tell us, how important is it to you that you're doing this as a family? Because you know, that just sort of comes through in the conversation that we're having.
I think for us, we have both known God's calling our life since before we were married. And then we got married, and then we figured out how to do ministry together. And all our time at Sawyers has been here as a couple, serving wholeheartedly.
Absolutely.
And I think for us, when God called us to do this, we knew it was for both of us to go and pioneer a church. As a couple, as a leadership couple, both equal in our standing within the church, but also saying, actually, when we're on the island right there, that Emma can be on the school gate sharing her faith. Our boys in local schools sharing their faith, and realising actually when we go anywhere, we're always called as a family. And the Bible says that as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And I think for us as a family, that's where we always have sat, and we're just excited to think in this next journey going to an island that we're going to move into a house, into a new neighbourhood with new neighbours. And from day one, knowing that God's called us, he's confirmed it, means that he's done that not just for me, not just for Emma, he's done it for Malachi and Judah and for Asher, which is exciting for an 8-month-old baby to think, God, how's God going to use an 8-month-old baby to reach people? And I think for us, that calling is so essential, because there will be days when we know it will be hard, and what we come back to isn't, oh, Ben said that we should come here, or Emma said we should come here, this was a stupid idea, why have we done this? But actually we can come back to the fact saying, no, God has called us, and what we sit on is the calling and the confirmation, not on Ben said, Emma said, Asher said, Malachi said, Judah said, Pete said, Stuart said. We come back to God said. And so for us as a couple, that's where we want to keep sat that whole time. So
brilliant, excellent. So obviously people watching from this, maybe from Brentwood or further afield, our knowledge of the Isle of Wight may not be excellent. So tell us, what is the Isle of Wight like? What is life going to be like for you guys planting a church there?
Definitely. It's going to be quite interesting and different. In some aspects, I think it will be similar in terms of the life we live, because we love our neighbours where we live at the moment. We are. It's not strange for me to come home and someone be sitting at the breakfast bar before the pandemic. At the moment, they are standing in our driveway talking to Emma and the boys. And I think for us, that extension of our life will be the same, really. Our door will always be open. Our community will always be welcome. We might have to do it in the garden or in the drive or wherever we want to do that. But the Isle of Wight itself is a very interesting place. And the more people I've spoken to about the island as a whole, is that we had the call, we had the confirmation, but then what came was the why. Like,
Yeah.
God, why the Isle of Wight? Why not Barbados? Why not America? Why not Canada? Why the Isle of Wight? And that's the next question we start to pursue. And at that point is where God moved really to our heart, and my heart and Emma's heart really was that I've been the youth pastor here since 2012. And in that time, we've seen amazing things in this church. We've seen amazing Christmas events. We've seen amazing baptisms. We've seen the church grow and people be sent out. We've seen like Samuel coming here and helping him through Bible college. All those amazing things going on here. And then through that, I think what I started to realise was that when I looked at the Isle of Wight, and me and Emma started to look, since the time I started and the amazing things I've seen God do here, 80 churches on the Isle of Wight have shut.
Wow.
Which is just under half the churches on the island.
Yeah, yeah.
And I suppose the thing that shocked me was I've been going on holiday there since I was 15, and I've always seen churches being shut, being converted into flats, being knocked down, but it never actually resonated with me, because then what I started to think was that's just under half the churches on the island. So when we were there buying a house, that was just in the back of my mind that all these churches shutting down. And we looked at the first house we looked at, and we pulled up, and literally as we were looking straight ahead, there was an evangelical church that must have only been planted there maybe 150 years ago.
Right, yeah.
And it was being knocked down.
Okay.
It had been a snooker hall for 20 years.
Yeah.
And that brought sadness on two levels. One, that there was this building that Christians had faithfully given to, that had been a snooker hall for 20 years, and no one else wanted to use it. No other Christians wanted to try and revitalise it. But two, that it was being knocked down, that this symbol of hope in a community, a church, when you walk past, gives people this, oh, there's a something here beyond us. That's gone. And then that started to lead to the fact that in the area we're moving to, there's 35,000 people, there's like 15 churches, and the biggest of those is only 100 people. So even if each church has, and some of those churches are small Anglican churches, would have only got a service in an evening for half an hour. And then we started looking at online church on the island, and then you start realising where we're moving, hardly any of the churches even do online church.
No, sure.
And then it started to, God really spoke to me about the fact that what would it mean for you to go? Like, what would it have to be worth? And obviously you go through the list, like maybe an actual church building, maybe 100 people, maybe 50 people, maybe 10 people. What would it be worth to really move my family, risk it all? What would it have to be worth? And it all came down to one person.
Sure. Yeah.
That for the life of one person to be saved because we were willing to move has to be worth it. When Jesus died on the cross, he didn't do it in the moment knowing there's an instant 1,000 people who are going to be saved. He died purchasing for the future for all of us, not knowing who was going to accept it and who was going to reject him. And for us, we wanted to do the same. We wanted to say, God, if it's for one person, if this whole journey, moving house, making our kids leave school, giving up our job and moving, is all for one person, for that person being in heaven is worth it. And I think for us, that's kind of the drive, is that because also the area we're moving is in the top 20% of deprivation in the UK.
Right. Yeah.
So there's also a real need there for churches to be in social action. And Sawyers has taught us so much about that. And that's where you start, where Pete says that you know God's leading your steps because the stuff we've done historically helps us in the future.
Absolutely,
like being part of a church where there's a cap centre and knowing Eve so well and knowing her love for people. Knowing stuff about the food bank and manor mills, knowing stuff about Lighthouse Furniture Project, knowing how a church is much more than a Sunday service. But if you've ever been to our church and if you're online, you've missed a great trick, because the people who come through our doors, the people who come in one day broken, lost and hurt, but find a hope here just by coming to a cafe and having a conversation and meeting the right person. And that's what we want to take to the island, a church who, when the community experiences, first experience of church is its love. That when people say, I've heard of that church, they're the church who gave those homeless people meals.
Exactly,
They're the church who put that kids club on for my kid, and being part of a church where we've done that, for me and Emma are so excited to think in a church, in a community where they're in the top 20% of deprivation, where the churches are literally dying and disappearing. We could go there with this hope of Jesus, share it physically by sharing food, but also share the supernatural love of Jesus that can transform lives. So for us, that's it. And Emma said to me very early on, she said, so many people have said to us, why are you planting a church in the middle of a pandemic? Surely you should wait. And there's this Bible verse that says that I will build my church and the gates of hell will never prevail against it. And so Emma just had this dog-eared determination to say, no, that Bible verse is just as true today for us planting in the middle of a pandemic as it is when we're in the best season, the church is flourishing and we can meet in each other's homes, we can have barbecues. Actually, the question is, will we trust God to believe that Bible verse to be true? Because as we know during the lockdown, that we as an active church in our community have seen the need from people who aren't Christians. And actually we've seen that the gates of hell haven't prevailed against us during this time. And we want to go and plant a church where we can declare that over the Bay Area in the Isle of Wight and say, you know what, it doesn't look good right now, but there's a hope beyond there is today. And we want to take that to that place where those statistics are people. That 20%, being that top 20%, is people in their homes unable to feed their family. It's the homeless people on the streets. It's the people who, during lockdown, their seasonal work didn't happen. And for a church to turn up and say, look, we're just here to serve you however we can. And the one thing we learned from being here is that the best leaders are the leaders who serve, who are there to sit with people in their pain, who haven't always got the answers. We're not going there saying we've got the solution, but we're going there carrying Jesus and saying, what we've got, we can share with you.
Absolutely.
And if that's just a loaf of bread and sitting with someone in the midst of their pain, that's all we've got, that's what we'll give. So kind of for us, that's what it kind of looks like for us at the moment.
We're all hope carriers.
Yeah.
Ben and Emma are taking God's hope to the Isle of Wight, but you're a hope carrier as well.
Yeah.
And I love the bit you said there about Ben, about how God is preparing you now for what He's going to do in your life in the future. And it's the same for you there sitting listening to this, that God is doing stuff in your life right now to prepare you for the plans He has for you in the future. And you too are a hope carrier in your community and in your town. So Ben, just tell us a little bit about your strategy, the how. How are you going to sort of start this church on the Isle of Wight?
We're really excited to be going there and to be turning up. And so we've been really praying into what is it that God wants us to do, really. And I suppose the big thing for us, and the phrase that keeps coming back to us, is that God's asked us to show the love of God to people before we've ever asked anything of them. Rather than inviting someone to a church service and then offering them the help they need, what would it look like to meet someone at their need and then meet their need because of God's outrageous love, and then invite them to an online service to start with? So to start with, we'll be doing things like flash mob giving. So me and Emma will have days where we say, today we're going to take some of the money that we've been given and we're going to buy 100 packets of nappies. We're going to go to the local library and bless our community with nappies. We'll be working with local schools trying to help them meet the need of saying, well, how do Christians on this island represent God in assemblies when Christian workers can't go into schools? So how can we help that need? And I think for us, the big thing is to meet people where they're at. So for some of us, we'll be starting online alphas after how successful it's been here, and a lot of our friends have run offline alphas across the country. And just seeing that this season we've been through has created a deep need in people for a place to talk, really. And Alpha creates a place where questions can be asked, not always the answers given, but people can see that, wow, there are people who are willing to journey this with me. And we'll be doing online services as well, realising there's a huge need on the island for online services where we can actually say to people, we can meet you afterwards and we can meet socially distanced outside and create that sort of moment. But really for us, we want to let the community see what it looks like to be loved by God before we ask anything of them. And so for us, that'll be, for me, I've got a real passion for door-to-door work. I know many of you would be cringing and thinking, I would never do that ever. But when I was at Bible college, we did that for a whole year, knocking on people's doors. And there's a way to do it. There's my way of doing it as a 30-year-old man. That literally is just meeting people on their doorstep saying, I'm Ben, we've moved to the area, I'm an Assemblies of God minister, and we want to let you know that our church is here for you. Absolutely. It's not here for the Christians. No. They get blessed by it, they get to take part in it, but church exists for its community. And we want to be able to knock on people's doors and say, look, we're here to love you. If you've got any need, if you've got anything that's going on in your life, if you need someone to talk to or to pray with, or even just to sit down and have a cup of tea with them and just say, you know what, life's a bit rubbish at the moment. I want them to know that that's what me and Emma, the boys, are here for. So to start with, it'll all be around getting to know our community, seeing a need and meeting a need. And that's yet again where being part of a church like this has helped us so much, because we see that meeting a need can be met in so many different ways. It's not always the obvious, here's some food. It can be actually, the food isn't really the issue, but it's the conversation with the person dropping it off.
And that's the way Jesus went about his ministry. He, when he went into a town or into a region, he met people's needs. He turned water into wine. He fed the 4,000. He fed the 5,000. And in the midst of that, there was a conversation. And in the midst of that, people got saved and became Christians. So fantastic strategy. So Ben, yourself and Emma have shared the vision for this church plant with the leadership here at Sawyers Church. And we as a leadership really want to get behind Ben and Emma and support Ben and Emma in this step of faith. And so as a leadership, we've decided that we are going to support Ben and Emma by giving them a gift of £4,000, which will be to sort of be able to put in the bank and to use to actually start the church plant. So we're going to be giving them a gift of £4,000, and then awesome. To support them as a couple, we're going to be supporting them £400 a month from our missions budget awesome. For at least the next 2 years. And we felt that was a great way of just getting behind Ben and Emma. But it's not just about finances, it's about prayer support and practical support as well. But that's what we're sort of doing as a church. But how can people sort of listen to this? You know, I know there's opportunities to pioneer with you and to partner with you. So tell us, Ben, a little bit about how people watching this can support you in this venture.
Firstly, we want to say a huge thank you to the Sawyers Church leadership that they're behind us. Financially, just giving us that £4,000 means what's great is to know that in a year's time we get feedback to you, the people whose life that's affected. Isn't that awesome? That's what we love, is that every single pound represents a person who we can bless. And that could be a cup of tea sitting in our driveway, or that could be blessing someone with food. So we really want to thank Sawyers for that, and the monthly giving as well to give us that start of support. But for you at home, or you here watching with us today, we really want people to pioneer with us. And the big thing God's laid in our heart is that we don't want to be sponsored by people. No. We want people to really partner with us in this and to pioneer a church. And I suppose one of the blessings we're in this generation, and what lockdown has showed us, is that so much more is possible than we ever thought was. So by partnering with us to pioneer, what we're saying is actually you can watch us on Instagram and Facebook when we're doing campaigns and are doing stuff. You can actually join in on that just by watching, because we can do Instagram lives where we're doing barbecues for our community, and you can see exactly where your money's going. It's not about a yearly newsletter. It's about this constant connection where you're helping us by your social networks, by pioneering with us. And what we're asking really of the church family and watching day is that to be a pioneer for, and our church is going to be called Altitude Church. To pioneer with Altitude Church, what we're asking is we're looking for 60 people to partner with us for £20 a month. To say to us, actually, we believe in the vision, the calling, and that God's confirmed that. And actually, maybe you're here today watching and God's saying to you, how can you help? And for us, that's what it is. And we really believe in that. Partnering with us to become a pioneer is much more than just £20 a month. We believe it's praying into the future of Altitude Church. It's about watching us on Instagram, watching us on Facebook, receiving WhatsApps and saying, there's a need right now that we can pray into. When we're doing beach missions, that you know that when you're watching us that week online, you're like, that's where my money's gone. That's the life we're affecting. And I think for us, the exciting thing that God really spoke to me early on about this with the finance side, really, because if we're honest, the finance is always the unusual part of Christian ministry. And God spoke to me about a really good friend of Pete's called Bill Howe. And we were walking, I took him out for coffee when he was visiting us last time. And we walked down the road and we were talking about living in the faith gap. We walked down the road together. Bill's, he's a bit out there. And he said to me, he was talking about, he said, Ben, you walk next to me. And so he said, now you walk on the curb. And he says, the difference is not even a metre, is it? He said, but how do you feel now you're walking on the edge of the curb between you and the road? I said, I feel pretty out here, Bill. Can I step back, please? And he said to me, that's, as leaders, where we always need to be. He said, it's so much nicer being on the pavement, because you're going to get to where you're going to get to. Heaven is our destination. But he said, as leaders, we should, and as Christians, we should always live on the edge of the faith gap. And what God said to me was that for me and Emma and our family, we're believing God for our salary, we're believing God for the income to provide the support for our community. But what that leaves behind us is a faith void. And actually in that void, for me and Emma, we're believing God for this amount of money. Maybe for you watching at home, you're going, actually, can we believe as a family for £20 a month? And in that faith gap, what happens is that other people say, actually, yeah, I can meet that £20, or I can meet that £10, or that £50. And as God challenges you, what happens is where we leave faith voids, where we step out this big step, what happens is God comes in with all these other people. And for us, one of the miracles I was just telling people before this is that some people have already pledged to support us, which is absolutely amazing. But what's more amazing is 3 of those people who are partnering with us, we have never met. We don't know how they've heard about us, but they are from the Isle of Wight, and they've said that we believe God has called someone to plant a church here, and we've just heard about you, and we want to financially commit to support you doing this before they've met us, before we've asked anything of them, before we've done anything for them. And for us, that trust that where we step out, it creates a void and a vacuum. And then Christians around us go, actually, I want to partner with you. And you see that all the way through the Gospels with Paul and Timothy and Titus, writing back to generous churches who have said, actually, we want to partner with you, Paul. We want to see God's kingdom come to Macedonia. We want to see God's kingdom come to Ephesus. And those faith voids create these vacuums where Christians go, actually, I can do that bit there and I can join in. And for you guys at home who are watching, we want to thank you in advance for partnering with us. But we want to thank you that actually we're part of a church where we can do this. We haven't had to break away or run away. We've managed to do this together and say, actually, this is where we're going. And being part of a church family has always been so much more than a job. It's always been much more than a building or a group that I'm involved with. It's being part of a family that loves and cares for each other, but also says being part of everyone grows as a church means that there are going to be points where growth goes beyond what we ever expected. And for us, when we first had this conversation, we both said we both expected it, but we didn't think it'd be right now. So if you want to partner with us and become an Altitude Pioneer, we would absolutely love that. The details will come on the screen afterwards and you can find out about it and go to the website. If you want to talk more about it, that's absolutely fine. Just two things to let you know that one is that Altitude Church is in the process of becoming a charity via Assemblies of God. So that'll be set up within the next kind of 3 to 6 months. But we're halfway through doing that now, which has been, and Assemblies of God have been outstanding. And I'm really glad that as I move to plant a church, that I know my home church is part of this amazing network of churches. And the other thing is we are partnering also with stewardship. So all the money that is given goes through stewardship. They claim all our gift aid. They give us accountability. They provide us a better way of handling our finances, because for us, we want to be above board with all our finances, and we want to give you guys who are giving the confidence to know that it goes through a whole other company first who looks after our finances, then releases it to us. So for all of you, if you've got any more questions about that, or you want to know any more, please let us know. But we know, and I can say that God will provide. And for you guys at home, maybe you're in a situation right now, and that's what you need to hear today, that no matter where you're sitting, no matter what you're facing, God will provide, because God loves and cares for you. And I think us as a church, we've seen that time and time and time again. Yeah. We look at lockdown of where our finances should be to where they are. God provided.
Exactly. Yeah. So church family, online family, please think and pray about this. And if you can be a pioneer, then obviously there is going to be shown on the screen ways in which you can become pioneers of Altitude Church on the Isle of Wight.
My world changes, you're there. When I lift my voice, sorrow traded for freedom, for love, for you. Even through my pain, I will lift my voice and say, my hope is alive. My hands